This is going to be a good one today. Ken, we've got a very special episode. You have recently contacted Matthew. Matthew's created an amazing podcast called Commendable Commotion. Ken, why don't you tell us exactly what's going on? And we're going to get into this conversation about the increasingly curious case of Thomas Crooks.
Yeah, sure. So I'm excited to be on here with both of you. Matthew's recently published one of the only projects about this that I've been really impressed with. A lot of the mainstream media stuff is just kind of tragedy porn and doesn't really get deep into the investigation. But even got to admit, I'm a little jealous of what Matthew was able to dig up on Thomas Crooks and his family history. Yeah, real quick, he contacted me, I think last October after I got the autopsy and toxicology reports. And he said he was working on a documentary. I said, yeah, well, okay, but a lot of people are doing stuff on this. I don't know how it'll turn out, but figured I'd talk to him. It would be worth, always worth talking to people. And yeah, he did something that really knocked my socks off a couple weeks ago, the Panic in Bethel Park. And yeah, I'll let him explain more if he wants.
Please
Sure.
do,
Well, thank
Matthew.
you for that. I appreciate that. Very, very kind of you, Ken, and very good of you to participate in it as well. Really appreciated it.
Yeah, so people can follow you on X, Matthew, at Commotion. You've got a really excellent podcast that you've just started. I believe the first episode is out right now on commendablecommotion.substack.com, and people can go right there and hear the first episode. Tell us what they're going to hear about on there.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so you're going to hear about, first of all, Ken Silva's trip to Pennsylvania to get the famous autopsy and toxicology reports. I listened to your show the other day that you did with Ken about those reports and the kind of new findings about them, which was incredibly intriguing. So you're going to hear that journey, and I don't want to put words in Ken's mouth. He was the one there, not me, but it really was an incredible journey from when I talked to him back in October about it. And it was just going to be one little interview that I was going to put on the general kind of, commendable commotion, Substack and YouTube, Spotify. But it was such a fascinating story, and there were just so many intriguing elements of what he was looking into regarding Thomas Crooks that I felt, Matthew, I think you should do like a little mini series on this. There's just so much information here and very useful information, not redundant information, very, very compelling information. So, one of the things was the Ken mentioned to me was about the van, the sort of buried story about the van, whether or not it was buried deliberately or not, I've no idea, but just, it's a story not many people know about. And Ken very wisely did some right to know law requests to get records about the van. It had Arizona license plates, even though it was very near the place where the Trump assassination attempt happened. We don't know anything about this van even to this day. Things like that, just little things. Little things. The significance of that particular incident is unclear, but it's an ongoing story. So that's pretty much what got me into this. Yeah.
Yeah, and the format is really intriguing. I think that people who like true crime podcasts and that sort of thing, we were talking about this before the show. It seems to me, as an American viewer, anytime we hear somebody with an Irish accent or a British accent, it always sounds just, I don't know, more mysterious or more intelligent, the delivery of the content. Ken, you were one of basically this episode, you're the primary subject. What were your feelings about it? What can you tell us about it?
Oh, I mean, I was just thrilled at how it was presented. That's a episode that I'll download and keep for years just to remember about, that October trip. Yeah, what else to say? I mean, if we want to jump right into it, the most intriguing part of the podcast for me was Crooks's family relations. He apparently has at least two, I don't know if you call them high-ranking military officials, but very, military careerists, special operations guys, really if you call it spooky stuff, if the kids might call it glowing. Whenever you see these kind of, I think we're all on the same page as like Crooks might be some kind of patsy. And whenever you see these kind of past stories, the patsies always have weird connections to people in the military or intelligence or federal law enforcement. So that was the most interesting part for me.
Yeah. And, if I could comment on it, I thought it was great how it really focused on you as the subject and took viewers who've been following your work on the journey that you went on, going to Butler, Pennsylvania, building the tension as far as how this medical paper they needed to print this thing on wasn't ready. And there's this moment where you're feeling like, hey, wait a minute, are these guys yanking my chain here? Or am I going to get this information or what? And you get some insight also into Ken's personal life for people who have been following Ken's work on X and elsewhere, JD_cashless. Of course, people also follow Ken on HeadlineUSA.com. It went into some detail how you had just started at Headline USA and they sort of like funded the trip. Give us a little background on that.
Yeah, so I think I might have told you back in October, but I'm sure a lot of people don't remember that I started in conservative media in like mid to late 2021. So I had missed January 6th, the 2020 election, all the big stories that define the next 4 years. And so when the Trump shooting happened, I was on Twitter and quickly jumped on. I was actually the first guy to write an article about the possibility of two shooters when I saw somebody give a live interview on, I think, NBC about somebody being in the water tower. And from there, I was hooked. I'm like, okay, this is going to be my story. I'm going to try to lead all the other reporters on this. And yeah, ever since July 13th, I've read, thought, or written about this case in some capacity, every day.
That water tower story was interesting because it seems to have come about from somebody at the location, just basically starting a whisper campaign. I forget the woman's name, Erin. We had her on Crowdsource the Truth, and she told us, that was the woman who was interviewed by NBC, and everybody initially felt like, wow, here's firsthand, this woman was there, and she didn't actually say that she saw someone on the water tower. She said that someone said there was someone on the water tower. It's an interesting kind of deception, don't you think, Matthew? If it's deception.
Yeah, funnily enough, you know far more about that than me. I did not really sort of look as much as you guys about what happened at the actual site in Butler for this podcast. I sort of more looked at um the Bethel Park side of it, if you will, and Ken's trip there with James Rogers and Ben Sellers, very kind, assistance with the trip when he was editor of Ken's newspaper, Headline USA. So it's an intriguing story that you brought up there. I'm not too familiar with it. You think it's deception, you say?
Well, I mean, the woman told us that when I questioned her about it further, she seemed like a very honest woman. So I don't think she was involved in deception. But I do a lot of reporting around New York City, and we see these clowns. They always seem to show up, the same kind of people who, it's amazing how they stalk and harass me, and the police never want to do anything to stop them. And I've been seeing them over years now. So it seems very clear to me that there are agents, provocateurs, agitators who get injected into these events for, I don't know, some purpose. And certainly planting, I hate to use the word, but disinformation, deliberately false information to send people down blind alleys. I mean, I think it's clear. We either believe that Thomas Crooks went and did this on his own, crazy kid who's having some kind of mental breakdown, either to drugs that they didn't test for in the autopsy, or his father sees him dancing in the room, according to reports, or whatever it is. Either we believe that kid went and did this on his own, climbed up to the roof, ran around for 20 or 30 minutes. None of the people, including crackhead Dave from Sheets or whatever his name is, Dave Stewart, none of those people have any video of Thomas Crooks running around. Nobody has any video of his drone in the air, but the police seem to have a lot of photos of Thomas Crooks from that day, and somebody seems to have known that something was going to happen. So the question is, did they have people in the crowd who were there deliberately deceiving us? I don't know.
Well, that Erin lady, I seem to recall when she went on your show last year, she also said that somebody showed her a photo of like a dead
Right,
body on a golf cart, and
right.
I don't think there's any credibility to that. And so I'm wondering who, but yeah, she does seem like an honest person. So who showed her a photo and why did she think that was a dead body on a cart? Why would she even believe that somebody would show that to her? A very This is just like one of a thousand things that it's like I wish I had all day every day to pursue these rabbit holes, but yeah, somebody somebody should look into that with more time than me.
Well, and certainly she would have no logical motivation to lie. She's not trying to create a podcast or a book or anything like that. And, that whole interest on my part came out of Roger Stone's initial Twitter post where he said, oh, the shooter appears to be Maxwell Urich. And it's super interesting to me, Ken, this process of creating the thumbnails. And Matthew, I apologize for not including you, but I didn't have a photo of you at the time I was making this. I don't know if you guys... Yeah, I don't know if you guys can immediately tell what I've done here, but this is a photo composite of Thomas Crooks and Maxwell Urich. And the thing that this revealed that's really quite intriguing from my point of view is that I guess the word I would use is congruity in their facial features is surprisingly similar. I don't have Photoshop on this computer, but, we're looking at the result. Certainly the right side of their faces. I really wanted to make the Maxwell Urich side this left side of Thomas Crooks's face because this photo actually reveals the unique anatomical feature on his right ear that was oddly missed by the people doing the autopsy, something, Ken, that we've spoken to other coroners about who've said that's weird. That's such a unique anatomical feature of these cartilage bumps on the outer helix of the right ear wouldn't be notated in the autopsy. But the shape of their skulls, the positioning of their eyes, certainly the right eye, matches up almost perfectly. And, Matthew, you and I haven't really spoken before today. I don't know how much you know about my background, but before I got into the world of podcasting and YouTubing and all that, I was a visual effects cinematographer in Hollywood, specialized in stereoscopic 3D. So I spent 20 years looking at image overlays and visual effects composites and getting two people with two different faces to overlay on top of each other and have facial structures align very well. It doesn't happen very often, and I'm not implying anything other than it's interesting that these two guys do actually look somewhat similar.
Well, as a side note, Jason, that's actually personally, I think, fascinating that you used to work in that career in Hollywood. I don't want to get too off topic, but that is fascinating for me because, commendable commotion. I'm trying to make it a sort of blend of the creative arts and true crime, parapolitics, that kind of thing. So I had no idea you used to work in Hollywood. So congrats and, belated congrats to you on
Thank
that.
you.
And that's interesting. The disinformation side of the story, whatever the disinformation may or may not be about the story generally, I'm trying to reflect that in the Panic in Bethel Park by sort of, making it almost be a sort of musical descent into madness, making the listeners question gradually throughout the episodes about maybe what's real and what isn't, what's disinformation and what isn't. Obviously, the podcast will, do its best to corroborate what's real and what isn't. But that's the sort of aesthetic way of doing it, if you will, sort of a hip hop infused descent into madness. But anyway, on that note, you mentioned Thomas Crooks sort of dancing around his room and possibly exhibiting some signs of mental illness. Um, Look, it's a very compelling and one of the most likely, obviously, motivations regarding what he did that day. I think we can all agree probably was very mentally ill. Anyone who would do
Well, no, wait a minute. I want to pause you right there. Sorry for interrupting, but this is one
no
of the
problem.
questions I wanted to ask you because this was the only sort of issue I had with the podcast. I think you do a great idea of creating that aesthetic that you're talking about, a real kind of mystery vibe. It definitely draws the listener in a really compelling way. But I was sort of taken aback that you started with the presumption that Thomas Crooks did it. What about the possibility that everything that we've been told is a lie?
That's a good question, and I appreciate your open-mindedness about this, definitely, and Ken's as well. I don't know. I'm just sort of, I have an open mind as well, I hope, and just trying to, sort of tell a narrative as I saw it when I read about what Yasmin Rodriguez encountered when she went there to Lawrence Avenue near the Butler site and reported on the news that there was a van, that kind of thing, and it was all over the news about Thomas Crooks apparently being, you know, shot, etc., and all this kind of thing. Personally, I believe, that was Thomas Crooks on the roof, but I appreciate your open-mindedness. I think that there's a lot of unanswered questions about this. And yeah, there we go. That's Yasmin Rodriguez from Pittsburgh's Action 4 News, I believe it's called.
Ooh, she's Taco Bell's #1 customer, according to her.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also just retweeted her contemporaneous reporting. That's at the top of my timeline, if you want to see what she said about the van. And also, I got a laugh. While you were talking, Jason, I got a tip from a source that I'll keep anonymous, but who says that is watching the show right now. It says that Aaron lady that talked about the water tower and you had her on said she's a wacko liar. Aaron was caught cheating in her own committee elections so she could be chair.
Wow.
I don't know the veracity of that, but that's an anonymous tip that somebody just DM'd me while we were speaking. So I
Well,
figured
it's a possibility, of course, Ken. And that's what I'm saying, is that we just don't know what's true. Maybe she said that just to get on the news. People are motivated by all kinds of things. There was some weird, sort of pseudo evidence, some video that got onto the internet shortly after this happened that basically looked like somebody took some form of AI up-resing software and turned what looked to me like video noise on top of that water tower into a dancing something or other. And there was that moment where people ran with that false evidence. I don't believe there was anybody on the water tower, but yet at the same time, there is evidence of a bullet trajectory coming from somewhere else. See, the reason I'm questioning whether it was Thomas Crooks on the roof or not, Ken knows this really well, and I'm delighted to hear, Matthew, that you're open to listening to this. I'm hopeful that future episodes, as your understanding of the event evolves, will maybe explore some of these topics, but there's just so much evidence that something other than what we're being told happened on the roof. And of course, whether Aaron intentionally or unintentionally introduced some false information, there's a lot of reason to believe that there's false information there. And, what does that do to our understanding of the story? I get it that Ms. Rodriguez being there early and giving us this kind of, real-time on the scene reporting, that does have value. But, they know, when I say they, if we think someone other than or in addition to Thomas Crooks was involved in this, it's not like it's 1963 and they're going to be surprised that there's lots of, eyewitness video and true crime podcasts exactly like Commendable Commotion. They're going to anticipate that, and they're going to want to kind of head it off at the pass by injecting all kinds of false information, blind alleys, red herrings. I think that stuff is all over this thing, including this van. I do not believe that Thomas Crooks created bombs. I don't even believe that he flew a drone. In your initial podcast, you do a great job of following Ken and his associate, the cinematographer. I forget his name, Ken.
James Rogers.
Yeah, James Rogers. So you guys are there. And actually, it's funny, I was there, and I'm sad that we didn't know each other at that time. But for the second Trump rally, you commented in real time, in fact. I think it was actual audio of you and Mr. Rogers there saying, oh, there's a drone overhead. And see, that to me makes a lot of sense, because drones, even these small consumer ones, they're noisy as hell. You notice them. Why does nobody else have a video of Thomas Crooks flying this drone around? What's with all this weird stuff? You know, my communications with Rafael Eduardo Castro. This is what I wanted to ask you, Ken. If you heard that somebody at a particular event, we're talking about the technology in use, right? If we hear that somebody at a particular event had a car or a cell phone, there's thousands of different possibilities of what that could be. If you hear they had a drone, maybe there's hundreds. But we've heard that Rafael Eduardo Castro, it's recorded, it's admitted, he was operating counter-UAS technology. Mm-hmm. When I looked into that a year ago, there were less than 12 manufacturers of that type of thing. Most of it was radio-based, like stuff that you mount on top of a Humvee to disrupt. What was the nature of the technology that he was using? And why does Palmer Luckey go so crazy when I say anything about drones? These are all the types of questions that are swirling through my mind. What do you think, Ken?
Well, there are definitely weird anomalies in the story about the drone. Supposedly, Agent Castro tried to set up the equipment near the stage. That didn't work, so he went in the Secret Service command post all morning. He can't get this thing up and running. He's calling tech support. He's calling Secret Service's HQ to get him, connected with some tech people. And then at, I think it's like 4:11 p.m., he says he notices that there's some problem with the Ethernet cable. It's just a cable issue. So he goes to where the Trump campaign people are, borrows a new cable, plugs it in, and then it starts to work perfectly right at 4:11 p.m. And the significance of that time is that Crooks, again, allegedly, as you say, we don't have any proof of this, but he supposedly drove from Bethel Park to Butler, got there at 3:50, gets out of his Elantra and flies that drone for like 11 minutes, stops at like 4:05, the drone flight is done, and then like 5 minutes later, the drone detection equipment is online. So that's like really stretches credulity to just believe that story.
Yeah.
But yeah. So who knows? And
Now,
another thing I was going to say is the FBI has recreated the supposed flight pattern. They say that when Crooks flew the drone, he did not record any video. He was just like live streaming some video over his phone, but didn't save it. However, they did recreate the exact flight path based off of data from the drone. This is according to the FBI. So
right. Well, and they would never lie to us, of course.
No,
We have to trust the FBI. The interesting thing about the drone flight, even if Crooks built the drone himself, which frankly, I would believe that sooner than I would believe him building explosives. There's lots of information and kits on how to build drones, but almost every single drone, even the most sophisticated hand-built ones, going to use a DJI flight controller. And I mean, the records that are kept on drone flights and how they're registered through their IP addresses and their MAC addresses and everything. I mean, it's like a phone call. There are records of that. If they wanted to know exactly what was going on with any particular drone, they would know. And as you said, there's all this anomalous stuff about the drones. Matthew, have you heard my interaction with this guy, Rafael Eduardo Castro?
I don't think so. I heard the one you did with someone from the ATF, I believe.
Uh-huh. Oh, let me play this for you. I think you're going to find it quite interesting.
Eduardo, is that you? Can you hear me? Is that Eduardo?
Who's speaking?
It's Jason. How are you, man?
I'm sorry, it's who?
It's Jason. I wanted to ask you about the drone you were flying in Butler, Pennsylvania. Was it an Andeville counter UAS drone? And why has your
I'm
name
not.
been hidden?
Oh, I'm sorry. Who do you work for?
I don't work for anybody. This is Jason. I work for myself. You were the drone operator, the counter UAS drone operator, right? Is this Special Agent Eduardo Castro?
Who do you work for? And
Have I
how
reached
did you get this number?
Eduardo Castro? I don't work for anyone. I have a show called Crowdsource the Truth. You were the drone operator during the Donald Trump assassination attempt, right? What was the function of the drone you were flying?
Sir, there's a government phone number for official business only. Do not call this number again.
Interesting phone call, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, you caught him on a bad day from what it sounds like. I don't know. It was, had you tried contacting him before that, or
Oh,
something?
no. No, that was
Yeah.
the first time he and I ever spoke. But I did speak to him one more time after that. He told me not to call that number ever again. So I got his cell phone number and called him at home and woke him up, and he was equally pissed off. So, I mean, again, there's all this weird and confusing stuff. I don't know if you've been following my efforts to sue the Beaver County ESU and get information about the photo. Ken mentioned the ATF. We got this information from Senator Ron Johnson that there was some mysterious dude in a gray suit on the roof. And got to be careful about what pictures we show here. We don't want the video to get dinged. But, I did, Ken is an inspiration, and I did a right to know with the Beaver County ESU. And stupidly, they sent me unredacted photos. So we have all these images that were redacted in the Chuck Grassley report. And I don't think this looks like Thomas Crooks. This is the dead guy on the roof. His ear looks definitely different than Thomas Crooks's ear. And I have been basically suing the Beaver County ESU and the district attorney's office to get the original photos from Detective Gian Vito's phone. And they don't want to give them to me, which, of course, if I were incorrect about any of this, those original photos would reveal that and reveal that I am a fool and this is all a conspiracy theory, but they're fighting tooth and nail to keep that stuff away from me.
Well, the second episode of The Panic in Bethel Park will go into the very sort of surreal questions that so many people have about this story. This sort of some may be fantasists, some may be very evidence-based, all that kind of thing. It goes into that, so it gets more surreal as the series will go on. And there's snow in the second episode too. There's a lot of snow. But anyway, back to the drone thing. In terms of the VPNs that Crooks was using for allegedly for, building bombs, according to some of the news reports. I don't know if he used VPNs to get hold of drone equipment, but I actually happened to be in Geneva, Switzerland, a couple of weeks ago. So I paid a visit, or at least tried paying a visit to the headquarters of
Proton.
one of the VPN companies that it
Oh,
just
I
came
bet they
out
loved
recently.
that.
I mean, the fact that I don't speak French very well probably didn't help, but so it was I think it was Proton Mail was what CBS, I think, mentioned he was using Proton Mail for some of these searches and internet stuff that we actually don't know what he was even doing. It's anyone's guess, but so I found out that they happened to be headquartered in Geneva, and so I kind of just got the bus there and I didn't really, say what I was doing. I just wanted to see, look, are they open to maybe talking to me? I said I'm a journalist, should be interested. And so they put me through, or no, it was some guy who worked beside the headquarters. The headquarters of Proton doesn't even have like a sign saying that Proton is based there. It's very, you know, uh,
Secretive?
Sure, I mean, like the whole nature of the technology, I
Yeah.
guess, to do with secrecy. So there we go. Proton Mail, a Swiss end-to-end encrypted email service. So the French-speaking guy was very nice, and he gave me an email for, I think, their office manager over at Proton Mail. So I emailed the office manager because I thought, well, okay, he gave me his email. He never got back to me. I might try following up. And the reason for me doing that wasn't to cause a ruckus. It was just to kind of see, look, it came out in CBS that Thomas Crooks was using Proton Mail, was one of his VPN services. Have you been contacted by the authorities about this? Have you been involved in any way? And if it's confidential, that's fine. You don't need to tell me. I was just interested in knowing for the purposes of the second episode of my podcast, where we'll get into some of his online activity, hopefully. But yeah, no, so far I just have not heard back from Proton Mail. I'll follow up again at some point. It's interesting though about the encryption side of things because Thomas Crooks was, as we know now, very interested in computers and encryption, cryptocurrency, all that kind of thing. And I'm not saying this implying anything sinister, but I just thought it was a kind of sad element of this whole story is that, he has family who were adjacent to sort of military cyber operations involving encryption, but I've no idea whether his family specifically were involved in encryption and cyber operations. I'm talking specifically about an uncle of his who was a chief of surgery at Fort Gordon over in Georgia. And obviously, very admirable surgeon for the military. I'm not saying this in any sort of weird way. I'm just saying that like it's kind of sad that Thomas Crooks developed such an interest in technological stuff that his family maybe had some uh, familiarity with to some extent, and unfortunately Thomas Crooks then wasted it by committing a crime and ending up getting
Well,
shot July
if
13th.
if he did in fact do that. I thought that was some of the most intriguing material that you uncovered in the podcast, his family's history in the military, and Ken has alluded to some of that. I guess it was Ken, was it Matthew who uncovered all that material that you were talking about?
Yeah, it was. I heard it for the first time when I listened to the podcast.
That was intriguing stuff for sure, and definitely interesting. But I mean, isn't it also true that Proton Mail is just a commercial service available to anybody, and lots of people are, particularly people who are very computer oriented, are maybe interested in privacy and end-to-end encryption, and somebody his age being interested in Bitcoin and blockchain and encryption. It's kind of pretty normal for a computer nerd, but they made such a big deal out of it on the news that he had foreign apps on his phone. I mean, I'm sure if you checked anybody's phone, you got TikTok on your phone, you could say, oh, they got Chinese apps on his phone. Ooh, it's a little bit pushing it, isn't it?
It's speculative for sure. I would just say that, so many people say, "Oh, we don't know anything about Thomas Crooks." Like you'll see, like Alex Jones just tweet out that get 5 million views. Well, this is us giving facts about Thomas Crooks, so it is. We're starting to at least try to uh, paint a picture about who this kid may have been. I think his interest in cryptocurrency is intriguing because I want to know who he may have been transacting with. Did he actually
Right.
have crypto? These are kind of questions that we really need answers to.
And
And
there
you
was
make a very
something,
good.
yeah,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, please, you.
Oh, sure. Okay. You make a very good point there, Jason, about how so many people use VPNs like Proton Mail. I'm not implying Proton Mail was up to anything sinister. I just thought it was interesting to pay them a visit and see, hey, have the police reached out to you, anything like that? Are you aware of this quite not magnificent, what's the word I'm looking for? Horrific story. But very big implications of this story.
Sensational even.
Sensational, that's the word I'm looking for. So a lot of people use VPNs, but in terms of the cryptocurrency uh, stuff, like there was a leaked document back in 2018. It's still not 100% confirmed how real this document is, as convincing as it seems to be. It's linked in the show notes of episode 1 of the Panic in Bethel Park. And it was a memo essentially, I think, or a letter from the Army Cyber Command or something like that, I believe it's called. And it was about the NSA essentially being involved with them in infiltrating cryptocurrency transactions. And the
Oh, I'm
source of
sure.
this, yeah, the source of this was Fort Gordon, Georgia,
Huh.
which I just thought was it was a little sort of intersection with the story we're discussing today anyway. And there's a picture of it somewhere down there. Again, it's not 100% confirmed whether this document is real, but, given Thomas Crooks' uncle worked at Fort Gordon, was very high up there as chief of surgery, if he was at all aware of the work his uncle did, then and the milieu he was in, I think he would have found it fascinating. All this stuff about cryptocurrency, encryption, possible intelligence agencies' involvement in those activities, all that kind of thing. Obviously, significance of that is completely unclear. I just thought it was a rather poignant, sad element of his life. I would be interested in knowing what conversations he had with his family, definitely. Really
Yeah,
would.
I appreciate your reluctance to accuse Proton Mail of being involved in anything sinister, but I'll go ahead and accuse him of that. I think all of these VPN and encrypted email services are absolutely infiltrated by the FBI, the NSA. I mean, we've heard tons of stories. There's that guy in jail, Cameron Ortis, that Canadian guy, who they've got locked away like forever. He was the first civilian director of some Canadian intelligence, maybe RCMP intelligence. And he's the one who said that they were entrapping people using these things. And it happened to me with Proton Mail. George Webb and this idiot he introduced me to, who told me his name was Richard Stone, but I later learned was Oki Marshall Richards. They were adamant that I communicate with them through Proton Mail. And then when Robert David Steele sued me, his attorney, who allegedly stroked out and is also a criminal, they were like, oh, we want to get these Proton Mail emails from you. And I think they must have sent me something that they intend. I mean, I didn't have access to it anymore because Proton Mail was such a pain in the butt to deal with. I just stopped using it. But we later learned from the Washington Post that Oki Marshall Richards was an FBI informant. I don't know if I've ever even gone into these details with you, Ken. It just hasn't come up. But Oki Marshall Richards, we learned from this thing here in the Washington Post, firefighter guilty for giving militia plan of the FBI site. This is all about how Oki Marshall Richards testified on behalf of the FBI that he had set up this guy, Floyd Looker, who went to jail for 19 years. Here it is. Oki Marshall Richards turned out to be an FBI informer who made hundreds of tape recordings. So this is the guy who wanted me to use Proton Mail in my interactions with him and George Webb. So I don't trust any of this stuff. This is how the FBI entraps people. Ken and I have looked at that sportsman's gun range thing where Crooks was signing, and I don't doubt that he went there and got on the video and all that. I am intrigued that his membership number was 1133. That seems like a coded message to me. There's a lot of weird stuff all over this.
There is. I'm not. I'm familiar, obviously, with the gun range and the strange activity surrounding that. I'm not entirely familiar with the 1133 thing you mentioned. What does that say to you, Jason and Ken?
Ken, do you want to?
Oh, I'll leave that to you, Jason. I'm not familiar
Sure.
with the numerology stuff.
But no, it's not numerology at all. It's not numerology, it's not gematria, it's not magic. I'm simply saying that I believe the number 33 is frequently used as a steganographic marker, a message hidden in plain sight. Now, I think you have it somewhere posted, right, Ken? The image
Yeah,
of
somebody did note, and again, I think this just might be a crazy coincidence, but the first shot was fired at 6:11 and 33 seconds. So I'm like,
I don't
okay,
think that's a crazy
it's
coincidence.
at
I
least
think
worth noting.
it's a very important detail, in fact, and that goes to another area of my research, is that the 6/11/33, the fact that CBS News reported that, it seemed remarkably specific to me because, what time was JFK shot? 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock? We don't even know. It was November 22nd, which, by the way, 11/22, also 33. I'm not saying it's magic. I'm not saying it's numerology. I'm saying this is a coded message that's being sent to someone who, when they know how to decode it, it means something to them. I don't know. But the point is that 6/11/33, I was thinking, well, what is this, a horse race or the Indianapolis 500? Why didn't it just say shortly after 6 o'clock or 6/11? 6/11 and 33? It seems just so specific to me. It just stuck out like in the most alarming way. And the other thing that I noticed that happened, let me see if I can find this piece of media, because at exactly that time, there was an anomaly in the window of American Glass Research. And that anomaly, I believe, was a laser, like infrared beam. So let's see, how will we find this? The beam, which some people first thought was there it is. Some people thought this was a muzzle flash, but there's no way it's a muzzle flash. So what I did here was, when we got the Butler, PA body camera footage, and you can see right here, it's 6/11/33 is where this begins. There's this little flash in the window on the first floor. This is exactly at the precise instant that the first shot is fired at Donald Trump. Now, what I've done here is I've stabilized the body camera. The police officer is running past the window. That's why we see this entire video frame sort of diving down to the right. This is 6 video frames here, so that's 1/5 of a second. A gun muzzle flash would transpire over about 1/500th or 1/1000th of a second, a fraction of the time of one video frame. It certainly would not last for 6 video frames. And I was able to line this up with the time of day because the inset video in the lower right, this is from the police dash cam, and that recorded sound. So we've got the time of day recorded on the right side broadcasting network. You know, they broadcast using SMPTE time code, and they showed us the time of day on their broadcast. So what I did is I took their whole entire recording. It's like 6 hours. It starts at noon, and it's more than 6 hours. But I went exactly to 6 p.m. I went in their video 1 frame back to where 5:59 p.m. became 6 p.m. And then I put a SMPTE time code burn-in clock right there. So now I was able to go back to any point in that video and know exactly what time of day it was. And using sound in that video and anywhere we could hear the gunshots, including on this police dash cam video, I was able to synchronize with a pretty high degree of accuracy the time to this SMPTE time of day time code. And so I was able to put time code on the police body camera footage, and this laser in the window appears exactly at 6/11/33. What is someone doing inside that building, and what is this laser doing being pressed right up against the window?
Does that window, first of all, does that window have a clear sight to
It does.
Trump's
To
podium?
Trump. It
Okay,
does.
you've established that?
Absolutely, it does. The other thing that's intriguing that a lot of people caught on to is there's another window which people are like, oh no, it's like that scene in Monty Python with Mr. Crearshow going into the restaurant. And no, it's the other scene where they say, can you find the fish? And everyone's like, oh, it's in his trousers. But this is another section of the video where the cop is running past another window. Now look at how this differs. See, these are the headlights reflecting in the window, and as the cop runs by, you can see them moving to the left because the car that's being reflected in the window, it's far away behind us. And this is an optical effect called motion parallax. As the police officer runs past the window, the lights move because they're being reflected from a distance. Now I'm going to go back to the previous video. You see this over the course of 6 frames, while the police officer is moving at the same rate, it doesn't move at all because there's someone inside the room pressing this light source right up against the glass. It's in the exact same three-dimensional plane as the window itself. And that is what somebody who understands how an infrared beam works would operate it. You don't want it reflecting off the window. You want to press it against the window so that it hits the target. And I don't know why this is being fired at the exact same moment that Donald Trump is being shot at, but it's certainly coincidental by definition, and I find it intriguing.
It is intriguing. It seems a little bit of a stretch to extrapolate from a flash of light and say that's for sure a laser rangefinder, right?
Well, what
Like
else could it be?
it could be anything. It could have been Greg Nichols. He had a cell phone open in there. I don't know.
What's he doing in there? Okay, let's explore that. Why is Greg Nichols inside the building with his cell phone open at the precise moment that shots are being fired at Trump? You're right, it doesn't have to be in infrared, but our buddy Clay Higgins says it's a flash. Let me explain why that's wrong. You've experienced this yourself, even in a dark restaurant. If you see, or the paparazzi on video, if you go and stop a frame of video when flashes are firing in a dark room or a dark scene, the whole interior of the room would be illuminated for one frame by the flash, and also a flash would also last for 1/500th, 1/1000th, even less, not 6 video frames. This is the momentary press of a momentary button by a human finger on some sort of infrared laser.
Well, I don't know if it was. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Matthew.
I've no idea if that was Greg Nichols, but Greg Nichols had a bit of an incident a few months before the before the July 13th shooting, and Ken was I believe the first to report it, one of the first to report it. Maybe Ken would like to talk about that incident. Do you remember?
Yeah, Greg Nichols definitely an interesting character. According to his testimony in front of Congress, he was on the second floor of that AGR building, and he went downstairs to help search for Crooks. He opens up one of the back doors that was facing that King Cone's ice cream store. He sees a local cop and another unmarked cruiser pull up. They ask him, like, where is the suspicious person? And he says, he went around the building, and he points to where the building, there's like a connector, but you can't actually go around it. You'd have to go over the connector. And they kind of tell him like that, like, he didn't go around there. It's all one building. And Greg is like, okay, well, that's where I saw him go. And then Greg eventually pops out the other side at like 6:13, looking very nonchalant, even though an assassination attempt had supposedly just taken place right above his head. He says that it would be right in that range where that window that you showed that you think might be a laser rangefinder. He says that he's looking around and he actually sees a bunch of people looking at him, like all looking at the AGR building, and he's like, what's going on? And then he hears shots fired above him, and that's when he realized something happened. The incident Matthew was referring to was like in December 2023. He accidentally shot himself, according to a report in the Beaver Countyan, while he was like pulling out his .45 sidearm to show somebody. That's the official story. I don't know how like a high skilled operator would do that. But he was sued for civil rights violations in the 2000s. So he has had various mishaps in his career, none more so than him inexplicably leaving his post minutes before a president was almost assassinated.
Now, wait a minute. Let me just recap that with you a second. So he said he saw Thomas Crooks walking around an area of the building that the construction of the building dictates he couldn't possibly have been doing. Is that what you just told us?
Yes, let me see if I could pull up the exact wording. Yeah, he radioed at like 6:08. Hey, Crooks, like not only did he tell the local cops, but he said it over the radio that Crooks is headed towards the sheets, giving the impression that Crooks was walking all the way around the AGR building and towards that gas station.
Crackhead Dave's employer.
Yeah, when in fact he was not going all the way around the AGR building. He was going in between two of the separated buildings and supposedly climbed up. This is at 6:06 p.m.
Mm-hmm. Another 33, by the way. And I don't know if Matthew has seen this element from the unredacted police report, but these photos of Thomas Crooks allegedly before the shooting that nobody else seems to have him on video, these were also taken by Greg Nichols, and these also have been not given to me in terms of the original photos from his phone. I allege these photos were taken on some day other than July 13th. You could have taken these any day at all, staged this, have him down there, just take it from, I mean, this guy's hanging out around the building. We had loads of people running around where Unsteady Dave was shooting his shaky video that he has still yet to produce the original copy of. Nobody saw this guy? Nobody has him on video?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that photo because, we've been talking a little bit offline about, how they identified Crooks, like how that could have even been possible. And so that unredacted after action report that you got has the Detective Gian Vito's photo. I think says it's taken at 7:26 p.m. on the rooftop, and it says facial recognition photo.
Right.
However, when I read the transcript from the ATF agent who was interviewed by the task force about how they identified Crooks, he says that they used that Greg Nichols photo and compared it to Crooks's driver license photo. Basically, they traced the rifle, and then the ATF had somebody called an intelligence research specialist put together an intelligence packet on the Crooks family, which included a driver's license photo of Thomas Crooks as well as Matthew Crooks. And then the ATF agents looked at that, compared it to Greg Nichols' photo. I don't even know if they used actual facial recognition technology. They just said, well, hey, this kid kind of looks like Greg Nichols' picture. And we know the rifle
amazing.
belongs to the dad, so it's probably them. Let's head to the house and check it out.
Now, Ken, I know you're not a forensic expert, but kind of looks like it. Doesn't sound super technical to me.
Well, I mean, so they said they traced the rifle to the father, and then they look at the picture of the father. Well, it's definitely not this big fat guy, but it does look like the kid. Like that's kind of the sense that I got based off of the testimony, which kind of seems reasonable to me because they were going to then go to the house and, pursue the investigation and look into, the family.
Right, but why? And I know you don't have the answer to this, but just thinking out loud, if bombs are being built in the house, I mean, why didn't they arrest the father? Why didn't they bring him in and, detain him and question him? I mean, don't you find that strange, Matthew, that they just sort of like told him, oh, yeah, by the way, we think maybe your son just got killed on the roof because it looks like this?
Well, as Ken mentioned in a previous interview, and as you know yourself, there was, I believe, a CNN reporter called Matthew Crooks saying, hey, is it true your son is the one who shot Trump? And so someone leaked it apparently to the media, whoever that was. And so then the ATF arrived, as you described, and it's all a very strange situation. The whole thing is curious, to be honest. I don't even know where to begin with that sort of topic.
Yeah,
But
can I take that one, Matthew?
yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So to Jason's question, this is intriguing because the ATF, this is a different ATF agent. So the two ATF agents were interviewed by Congress. The first one that I just talked to you about how the Crooks was identified, that was Agent One. Agent Two actually responded to the family's home in Bethel Park, and he's the one who talked to the dad. The dad gives consent to go search, and he says he walks into Thomas's room and he sees a 50 caliber ammo canister with wires sticking out on it. Next to it is a big jug of racing fuel that's, used to make ammo bombs. And the Congress specifically asked the ATF agent, do you believe that it would have been possible for the parents not to have smelled it? It's like as soon as
Right.
you open that canister, it would stink up the whole house. Like this
Of
is
course.
very explosive fuel. However, the FBI later told Congress, this is in the final report, that the racing fuel wouldn't necessarily emit an odor, and so it's plausible that the parents wouldn't have known what was going on. I find that to be a stretch, but that's what the ATF claims, or no, sorry, that's what the FBI claims, and it directly contradicts the ATF agents' testimony. One other interesting thing about the ATF's testimony, who first interviewed Thomas or Matthew Crooks, first responded to the house. He says he recounts his interview with Matthew. He's like, Matthew didn't say much about his son. He didn't know anything about his son's politics other than he was like a contrarian, liked to argue with us. Whatever side we took, he would take the opposite. I didn't even know if he talked to girls. At one point, I asked him if he was gay, kind of painting him as like a loner incel. That's all we know. Um, but the father never mentioned mental health issues to the ATF agent. And then this is like a 40-minute interview. Finally, the FBI shows up and takes control of the scene. The reason the ATF was the lead on this is because they got the trace on the rifle, but the FBI catches up. They take over everything. And then weeks later, we get all these reports about mental health issues. But the ATF agent was never told that by the father. And so, like that would seems to me like it would be one of the first things that would come up in an interview where your son tries to kill somebody. Well, yeah, he had mental health issues. So we got two major contradictions here between the ATF, the lead, which was the lead on this at first, and the FBI, which later took place. The mental health issues and whether or not this racing fuel would emit odor.
But
Just more
does
contradiction.
does it also make any sense that the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, I think it also used to be explosives in there, but they are specialists in investigating this stuff, that you have what looks like a makeshift bomb in your house, and you say, well, the owner of the house probably didn't know. Does that make any sense at all, rather than detaining the guy, questioning him, fingerprinting him, trying to, they just say, well, the father probably didn't know. How do they know the father's not building the bombs and helping the kid? The whole thing is ridiculous, isn't it?
Well, yeah, like I said, the ATF agent suspected that the father did know. He's like, yeah, that thing would have stunk up the whole house. But then he is only involved in the first 40 minutes. The FBI shows up, and then we don't know what happened after that. We get this story about, oh, the FBI says, no, it wouldn't stink. Oh, the kid had mental health issues. None of this was told to the ATF agent.
Amazing. I think the FBI knows a lot about stuff that stinks. Matthew, another amazing point that you brought up in your podcast, The Panic in Bethel Park, was that Crooks had I believe it was his grandmother or his aunt who was working at the university. What was the aunt doing?
I believe it was Madeline Fritzi, worked at the University of Pittsburgh's School of Medicine in the 1960s, possibly afterwards as well. She did experiments on baby chickens. And I don't mean like brain experiments, I just mean like, little snip experiments. I think there's a document that you can find there somewhere on Google Scholar involving little baby chickens, and it was surgical sort of procedures. Now, one of her sons was obviously then later Lieutenant Colonel James Fritzi, Thomas Crooks' uncle. So Madeline Fritzi, the grandma, was doing the baby chickens experiments. So I just thought it was an amusing little anecdote, the poor chickens. But Lieutenant Colonel James Fritzi apparently maintained that medical interest in the family. Some other relatives did as well. One of Thomas Crook's cousins is a trauma specialist, I believe, and a child psychologist based in Pittsburgh. So he's got an interesting family. But that's Madeline Fritzi, of the University of Pittsburgh's School of Medicine. Now, as you guys may know, Madeline Fritzi, the New York Times managed to get in touch with Madeline quite recently, I think, over the past couple of months or something. They tried to get a comment from her about, well, what was going on in Thomas Crooks's life. And as you guys probably know, she just said, I have no interaction with Thomas Crooks' parents or his sister whatsoever, and that was it. They wanted her to elaborate. Well, why? I mean, why do you not see them? I mean, you live in Pittsburgh. You live, I think, near Bethel Park. I think she lived in. Why? And she didn't elaborate. She didn't want to say why. So I mean, I'm not going to speculate why. There maybe might be some division or estrangement within the family. But as Ken noticed as well as myself, what's interesting is corroborating that possible estrangement. There's an obituary for, I think his name is John Fritzy, so he's another uncle of Thomas. And he was based in the Southwest United States or died in the Southwest. Mary and Matthew Crooks and Thomas and Catherine Crooks, they're not mentioned in the obituary despite being immediate family and being immediate in-laws. Now that's not exactly explosive information, but I still thought it was, kind of curious and kind of poignant, and it very much fit in with what the New York Times experienced when they tried talking to Madeline Fritzy. They didn't mention that obituary. We just happened to find it on the internet. So I don't know what was going on in the family, but if you look back to obituaries and public records back to the early 2000s, you'll find them mentioned. So this division, I doubt it was all of the family. It was probably just between a few of them, if there even was any. It probably happened quite recently. I'm speculating. I don't know. But on another note, I should mention that in the early 2000s, and this has nothing to do with that possible division, I just found out yesterday, and I just thought this was interesting because, again, it highlights how Thomas Crooks, his interest in a military career may have partly stemmed from this. I don't know. One of his uncles, Larry Macco Sr., I just found out yesterday, he used to work for the United States Information Agency.
Hmm.
And that, I don't know what the significance of that is. I just thought it was kind of interesting because school classmates told a publication early on. It's kind of hard to find now. I'm still actually looking for the exact article that he was interested in joining the military. Thomas Crooks was, as were a couple of his friends in high school. Because he did have friends. It wasn't quite as the media were painting it out to be in the initial months. So
That was some excellent digging that you did, where you spoke to a teacher at the school who basically flat out said, I mean, he didn't come right out and say it, but he implied quite strenuously that the person who said that Thomas Crooks was a loner who had been bullied was not someone that he would necessarily trust. So again, another case of someone, for whatever reason, potentially injecting false information. But just back on Madeline Fritzy for a moment. So you found out that she was working at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine doing research into chickens. And what's interesting to note is that the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine and UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, are closely linked, forming a major academic and clinical health system in Pittsburgh. And it's also quite noteworthy that Matthew Crooks is a care manager at Community Care and Behavioral Health, which is UPMC. So this is a pretty tight-knit thing. I think there was some speculation about, as these kind of caregivers, could they prescribe SSRIs or certain kind of medication? I can tell you the answer is no. Only an MD can prescribe medication in the United States, and these people are not MDs, so they would not be able to. A psychiatrist could, psychologist could not. So that's an important distinction there. We're running up on an hour here, guys, and I think we could probably talk about this for hours and hours. I don't know if there's anything else that either of you guys want to add, but certainly we could revisit this in a future show. I want to make sure that people know that they can get to Matthew on X at Commotion, and you don't want to miss his podcast if you're interested in understanding what's going on with Thomas Crooks and the Trump assassination attempt. You got to check out commendablecommotion.substack.com and listen to The Panic in Bethel Park. Matthew, anything you want to say before we wrap up today?
I don't think so. I mean, I thank you so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun talking to you both, and happy to talk anytime you want in the future. And I just greatly appreciate you pointing people towards the Panic in Bethel Park. And there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff in episode 2. I'd like to talk to people like Doug Hagman and Jack Posobiec to see if they'll be on the show. I've already talked to Dana Kennedy from the New York Post, who was there, and who interviewed Doug Hagman in the snow about Thomas Crooks. But we'll have to see if they'll talk to me. But there's a lot of interesting things, and in terms of the UPMC thing, I know that you mentioned in your last interview about how the historic connections between MK Ultra and UPMC, and I've no idea actually about that. I am interested in MK Ultra, but I've no idea in relation to that regarding Thomas Crooks. But this is me speculating, but I'm wondering, when the CIA publicly denied that Thomas Crooks had any link to them, I'm wondering, was that maybe because, like, is it possible someone who, was adjacent to the intelligence community maybe said, look, I knew this kid, he wasn't involved in this. Can you just make that clear? I have no idea, but I'm just speculating, given he had members of his family who were very high-ranking military. I'm wondering, was that something to do with it? Like, maybe they were just embarrassed and it was like, hey, look, can you just get the word out there that, like, my nephew had nothing to do with you guys? I've no idea, because it is unusual the CIA would publicly deny that, as Ken pointed
Yeah.
out the other day. It's, that's not something I believe they usually do, to my understanding. So I don't know.
Yeah, no way to know. I agree with that. But I don't know, Ken, anything on that?
No, I mean, I've got 50 different things I could say, but I think we should do another episode in the future that focuses specifically on Maxwell Urich. And to that end, Jason, I don't even know if you've seen this yet. I did email you a list of investigative leads that Matthew helped put together. And so maybe we could talk offline after we close this out and figure out where to go from here. Because I do, like, regardless of whether it was Urich, Crooks, maybe Urich wasn't involved at all, he's part of this story for sure. So we need to find out what happened to him, where
Yeah,
he is, and who told Roger Stone it was him in the first place. That was obviously somebody well placed. He didn't just pull
right.
that out of his ass. So something's going on here. That Bob Dylan song, something's going on here, Mr. Jones. I'm not quite sure what it is, but we should definitely work together to try to figure this out.
I totally agree, Ken, because as you say, I mean, I never heard of Maxwell Urich before Roger Stone mentioned him. And right, where did he get that name from? If it wasn't him, why hasn't he come out in the past year plus to defend his name and say, hey, this guy Jason is an idiot for even mentioning it? I don't know why, but it's been a great episode with both of you guys. I hope that people will, follow each of us on X and check out the Substack posts. We'll definitely do another episode in the future. And thanks, everybody, for watching.